My name is Michelle Romig, and I'm currently a pastor's wife in Texas, and I was a one-time full-time missionary. Missions is taking the gospel to those who have no access to the gospel. We're not talking about just evangelizing to someone off the street. Here in the U.S., you can basically find a church anywhere. You move to a small town, there's a church there. You move to a big city, there's a church there. We have access to the gospel. Missions is taking the gospel to places where there might be one Christian in a city of 10 million, or there may be 10 Christians in a population of 100 million. And so it requires someone from the outside, from a different culture, to cross a culture and bring the gospel into this culture in a way that those within this cultural group can understand and access the gospel. I went through a period of depression when I was in college. God used that time to really humble me and make me open my eyes to just how He might be calling me to something different than the trajectory that my life was on. Part of that was that I felt convicted that I needed to go on a short-term mission trip. So I went on a short-term mission trip after I graduated college. I actually went with a small team from my local church to an area in Central Asia that consisted of a large Muslim people group who was a minority in a larger country. It was on that trip that I felt called to do missions long-term. The first conversation I had with my parents pretty much went like me telling them, I think God's calling me to full-time missions, and them saying, we don't think He is. So it came to them as a shock, but I knew that if God was going to call me to missions, that He would change my parents' heart, because they were both believers, and they had to be on board in some way. After a year of staying in San Francisco and working and continuing to be equipped, they were on board. They were some of my biggest supporters when I went. I spent years praying over, God, where do you want me to be? And one day I was feeling this very strong pull towards this particular area in China. This Unreached people group had maybe about 10 million in population. The high estimates were only about 100 or 200 believers. Someone sent me this fun little game, like, here's some questions, click next on your iTunes and the song will answer this question for you. And one of the questions was, where should I move to? And I clicked next on my iTunes. And mind you, I had thousands of songs in my iTunes, okay? I had 2 worship songs that were made in the native language of this people group. And one of them came on. When I asked this question, that was the next song on my iTunes. And it was just a silly but very significant, symbolic way that God was saying, hey, I actually am calling you to this people group and to this area. So that's why I went. So when I first moved onto the field, I had to do language study from the get-go, and it was from square one. Honestly, it was, again, by God's grace. I think 4 months in was the first time I was able to share the gospel with someone in the native language. And it was probably broken, and it was probably not the best. I didn't use all the right vocabulary, but I sat with her and chronologically told her the story of the Bible and how that led to Jesus, and I got to share the gospel with her. And so, it took time, but when you're immersed as well in the culture and in the language, you do tend to learn them a little faster. I grew up kind of feeling like I had my feet in 2 different worlds, and a lot of that insecurity came back up to the surface when I moved to China. I was Chinese American, and I kind of knew some of the nuances of being in Chinese culture, but I wasn't fully Chinese. But I also couldn't go and tell them I was American because I wasn't white. And so when I told, my Chinese friends or whoever that I was American, they'd be like, no, you're not. But when I tried to speak Chinese, they'd be like, what's wrong with you? Because you can't speak Chinese like we do. So I really didn't belong there, but I really didn't belong in this category of American either. And so I struggled with that quite a bit. And through that, God really taught me to find my security and my identity in Him. Yes, I have this very unique cultural background, and I don't quite fit in these categories that are out there, but I belong to Him, and that's what mattered most in the end. I think my biggest challenge for a long time when I first moved overseas was just being a single woman on the field. I was the only single woman on my team, and a lot of times I was just very lonely. And thankfully I had good team leaders that always had my back and everything, but I was extremely vulnerable because I was a single woman in a foreign country. It just came back to depending on God and knowing that He's sovereign over the situation. I've always been very independent, but there's nothing like depending on Him and knowing that He's taking care of me. Even in the midst of my loneliness, in the midst of feeling vulnerable, I didn't have to have it all together at that point because I knew that, who held me in the end. Technically, I met my husband when we were preparing to join the organization that we were both a part of. So I met him in Florida, but then it was really about a year later, we actually ended up on the same team. And so we worked together as teammates. We dated while we were in China. We returned to the US and got married and then returned to China after that. We served in China for about 3 years, a little longer for my husband because he was there before me. And we were in the Middle East for 4 years. My husband and I actually ran a restaurant, which was a very interesting experience. Not one that I would ever do again. We actually served Tex-Mex food. When we first got to the restaurant that we took over from another missionary, it was kind of a disaster. Between my husband and I, we probably spent about 80 hours a week at that restaurant. We woke up, went to the restaurant, came back home, went to sleep, and the next day was exactly the same. We had another missionary come alongside us who had more experience in the restaurant business. He helped us out a lot, and we were able to make some good decisions for this business. And by the time we left, the business was thriving. When we were running the restaurant, we had more access to believers from this Unreached people group. We had a few believers working for us. We were able to encourage them in just how do we do things like wash dishes and deal with conflict and even interact with customers in a way that is to the glory of God. We learned about as much from them as they did from us, I think. We were able to really work side by side and be a mutual encouragement to one another. And we had some non-believing employees from this people group working alongside us as well. I think that the local believers had more of the opportunity to share the gospel with their coworkers than we did as their employers. And so our hope was that our witness really spoke loudly to them. When we came back from China, we were very burnt out. And I told my husband, I'm not really ready to think about going anywhere just yet. But over time, as we were mobilizing a lot of the young people in our church, God was starting to open my heart up again to go. We saw there's a lot of people that can do what we do here in Kansas. That's where we were at the time. There's not a lot of people who will pick up their family and move. And so let's start looking. We contacted some of our contacts from when we were in missions previously. And one of the things that came to us was this opportunity of my husband being a pastor at an international church in the Middle East. My husband had become a pastor at the time. He really enjoyed preaching and shepherding God's people, and we saw the value of the local church in missions. He decided to apply for this position as a pastor in the Middle East, and they called us there. And so again, we followed God's calling and picked up our family and moved to the Middle East. There's nothing like being at the end of yourself and seeing God work. That was my greatest joy in missions, was just to see God work in situations and in places where you would never expect to see Him work. I got to sit in a room filled with Muslim college students and studying the Bible with them for the first time. I got to sit with girls who had never heard the gospel, watching the Jesus film and watching them be touched by the person of Jesus, and seeing that light bulb go off. I got to sit, after sharing my testimony one time, I had a Chinese, I wasn't even focused on Chinese per se, but I had a Chinese girl come up to me and say, when I was listening to your testimony, I thought, I want that. Will you please tell me how to have that? And I got to share the gospel with her and see her come to know the Lord. I didn't do any of that. It was the Holy Spirit at work. And that was amazing. It was always our plan to stay on the field as long as it took for the rest of our lives. We never intended to come back unless God called us. And that's really what happened. It was time. God, again, in his mysterious sovereignty, called us back. If I'm to be perfectly honest, I've been back for about a year from the Middle East. Some days I still don't understand why, but I have to trust that he has a purpose for us here, and we're going to continue to engage those who are lost, those who have less access to the gospel, and we're still going to, in our sphere of influence within our church, really try and instill in our people this desire to see God made known in our own communities here locally and also around the world.